first of all, to the ecological crisis. So, of course, we're all aware of what's going on. Climate change is already having a severe impact on human communities. We know that droughts are ravaging parts of the global south. In Somaliland, in Northeast Africa, 70% of livestock have recently been wiped out by drought. In Central America, people are being driven away from their homes in mass numbers towards North America. And in the Middle East and North Africa, a number of armed conflicts have erupted that are attributed to climate change, right? And all of this is happening at only 1 degree of warming so far. Things are set to become significantly worse over the course of this century. Even under the Paris agreements, the commitments that nations have made have us headed on a trajectory that will get us to about 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century, right? What will this scenario look like? We know that between 30 and 50% of existing species could go extinct. For human communities, aside from displacement due to sea level rise and so on. The main concern has to do with food, leading to famines in multiple regions at the same time. On top of this, large parts of the planet will become physically uninhabitable. To put this in perspective, right now there are around 65 million people who are displaced, right? And already with this level of displacement, it's causing fascist movements to rise, international alliances to break down. Multiply that by a factor of 20, and it's clear that that climate change this century, it's also about other dimensions of ecological breakdown, which are happening at the same time. So deforestation, with half of the planet's mature tropical forests having been wiped out in the past 50 years or 70 years. Soil depletion, with 40% of global topsoils depleted or seriously degraded. UN scientists say we only have 60 years of harvests left. Effectively, our economy is effectively a death cult. It's wiping out huge portions of the non-human world. The extinction rate now is up to 1,000 times faster than prior to the Industrial Revolution. We refer to this as the Anthropocene, right? The Anthropocene meaning the first era in which humans have had a decisive impact on geological processes and are shaping the planet. But the language of the Anthropocene actually has it wrong. Not all humans are equally responsible for this crisis. And this is a vital point. Take emissions, for instance. We know that a full 92% of total global emissions in excess of the planetary boundary have been caused by the rich nations of the global north. The USA alone is responsible for 40%. The global south, which has the vast majority of the world's population, has contributed only 8%. Okay, and yet the global south suffers the vast majority of the consequences of climate breakdown. Something similar is true of resource use. We know that one of the main metrics we use to our economy's impact on other ecological systems besides the climate is by tracking resource use. Excess resource use, way over the sustainable threshold, and I emphasize all of that, is due to excess consumption in high-income nations, right? And where does that excess resource use in the global north come from? It's extracted primarily from the global south, right? So it's crucial to understand that this crisis has clear colonial dimension. For communities in the global south, and specifically indigenous people, this crisis has been happening for 500 years, right? Like capitalism is a system that's 500 years old. The onset of capitalism was with the colonization of the Americas, right? And let me briefly explain what I mean by capitalism. When people think of capitalism, they tend to think of things like businesses and markets and trade and so on. But this actually isn't accurate. Markets and trade and businesses have been around for thousands of years, and capitalism is only 500 years old, right? And what makes capitalism distinctive is that it's organized around and dependent on perpetual growth, right? Ever increasing levels of extraction and production and consumption. It requires that. It's the first and only intrinsically expansionary system in human history. If it doesn't grow, it collapses. So capitalism needs to grow at a rate of about 3% per year. And that might seem like a small increment, but this is an exponential curve that very quickly becomes dangerous. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if GDP growth was just plucked out of thin air, but it's not. It's very tightly coupled to resource use and energy use. And so what will it take to arrest these trends in ecological breakdown? The dominant focus of our society is on emissions. And we think that this can be accomplished solely by rolling out renewable energy. Unfortunately, scientists are quite clear that that alone is not enough. And the reason is because the more we grow the economy, the more energy the economy requires it is to roll out sufficient renewable energy capacity. So what do? This is where degrowth comes in, okay? Scientists are increasingly clear that what's required is that high-income nations actively scale down their energy use. And to scale down their energy use, this is not just about turning off lights in, when you leave a room, et cetera. It's about scaling down unnecessary parts of the economy, right? Scaling down the material economy, because that's what really takes all of the energy. So the less economic activity we have in aggregates, the less energy we use, the easier it is to transition rapidly to renewable energy. So this is what's known as degrowth, which is a planned downscaling of resource and energy use to bring the economy back into balance with the living world. We've been told for so many years that that GDP growth is a proxy for human well-being. It turns out this is a lie. It was designed to measure the welfare of capitalism. It's an extraordinary ideological coup because we believe that it's good for us. How do you manage a kind of degrowth scenario? The first step is to abandon GDP as an objective and focus on what you want to achieve directly. The next step is to actively scale down ecologically destructive and socially less necessary industries. This can be done without any loss to people's quality of life in terms of their livelihoods by sharing existing income in the economy more fairly. Finally, expand universal public goods. So decommoditize the parts of the economy that are necessary for human need and well-being. The more that we have access to the resources we need to live flourishing lives on a decommoditized basis, the less we need private income in order to live decent lives. I see this as kind of crucial to thinking about decolonization. I mentioned earlier how excess resource use in the global north is effectively a colonial process on the global south. So therefore, degrowth in high-income nations is a kind of form of decolonizing the global south.